They talked about me like I was already dead. The words caught in my throat as I stood frozen in the hallway of my own home, a tray of lemonade trembling in my hands. Through the partially open door to the kitchen, I could see my son Kyle leaning over a hand-drawn map spread across the dining table. My daughter Heather nodding along as his finger traced invisible boundaries. Dad can't manage the property anymore, Kyle said with the casual certainty of someone discussing the weather. We should just start sorting this out now. I'm Walter Granger, 67 years old, a widower and retired high school history teacher from Boise, Idaho. For 40 years I taught young minds about the past while building my own future on 15 acres of land passed down from my father. Land that, according to the conversation I was overhearing, my children were now dividing between themselves. We'll sell the west side, Heather added, her voice cool and professional, the same tone she used when closing real estate deals. He always said that part wasn't useful anyway. I stood there, invisible, as they discussed my life's work as if it were already part of their inheritance. Not once did they mention that I was still alive, still breathing, still very much present in this world. Not a single question about what I wanted, just whispers about acreage, market values, and getting things in order. The ice clinked against the glass pitcher, and I watched my own hands, weathered, lined but still strong, grip the tray tighter. These were the hands that had built the barn out back, the hands that had planted apple trees with Margaret, my wife of 40 years before cancer took her 2 years ago, the hands that had once swung Heather and Kyle high in the air when they were small enough to believe their father was invincible. The southern corner could be subdivided, Kyle continued, completely unaware of my presence. Those 5 acres alone could set us up pretty well. I know a developer. Who'd snap it up immediately? Heather replied, already reaching for her phone. A drop of condensation from the pitcher slid down my wrist, cold as the realization washing over me. When had I become invisible to them? When had I transformed from their father into a ledger entry, a future inheritance, an inconvenience to be managed? I cleared my throat and they jumped as if caught stealing. The map was hastily folded, tucked away beneath real estate brochures and retirement home pamphlets. Dad? Heather's voice was too bright, too forced. We were just looking at some options for you. You know, planning ahead. Planning ahead, I echoed, setting down the tray with a steadiness I didn't feel. For what exactly? Kyle wouldn't meet my eyes. Just looking at, possibilities. The property's a lot to maintain on your own. I manage just fine, I said quietly, pouring 3 glasses of lemonade, though suddenly I wasn't thirsty anymore. Of course you do, Dad, Heather said, patting my hand in that condescending way people reserve for children and the elderly. But wouldn't it be nice to have something smaller, something easier? I handed them each a glass, noticing how Kyle's hands resembled mine. The same broad palms, the same knuckles, though his had never known real work, had never built anything lasting. This land has been in our family for 3 generations, I said. Your grandfather cleared it himself. And we're so grateful for that legacy, Heather replied smoothly. But times change, Dad. You're all alone here now. Alone. The word hit me like a physical blow. Yes, Margaret was gone, her side of the bed empty for 2 years now, but alone, with the memories in every corner of this house, with the orchard where we'd had our first kiss, with the field where my children had learned to ride bikes. I think you should both go now, I said quietly. Their protests washed over me, excuses about being concerned, about wanting the best for me, about how I was misunderstanding. But I had understood perfectly, too perfectly. After they left, the house felt both empty and suffocating. I walked out onto the porch and stared at the land that stretched before me, land that had witnessed my joys and sorrows, my triumphs and failures, land that my children now saw only as dollar signs. I couldn't bear to be in that house another minute, not with the echo of their words still ringing in my ears. I grabbed my worn denim jacket and headed toward the small neighborhood park 3 blocks away. It was nearly sunset, and the park would be quiet, a place to think, to breathe, to process the betrayal that was still settling in my chest like a stone. The evening air was cool against my face as I walked, hands deep in my pockets, shoulders hunched, against more than just the breeze. Fall was setting in, turning the world golden and red, beautiful, even as everything was dying. Like me, apparently, in the eyes of my children. The park was as I expected, nearly empty, peaceful. Children's laughter had been replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I sat on a bench beneath an old willow tree, watching as the last streaks of daylight painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, and that's when I saw him, an elderly man standing near the playground, turning slowly in a circle, clutching an envelope. His clothes were neat but mismatched, a cardigan buttoned incorrectly, dress shoes with casual pants. His white hair was combed meticulously to one side, but his eyes darted about with growing panic. I recognized that. Look, it was the same expression my father had worn in his final years, when the world he thought he knew suddenly became foreign territory. Without thinking, I stood and approached him slowly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you all right?" He turned to me, relief flooding his face. "Oh, thank goodness, I can't quite—" He held up the envelope with trembling hands. "I'm supposed to be somewhere, but I can't remember where." "May I?" I asked, gesturing to the envelope. He handed it to me, and I saw that it was addressed to a Chester Lowell at the Boise Senior Center, a building that had been demolished over a year ago to make way for luxury condominiums. The postmark on the envelope was from 1982. "Mr. Lowell?" I asked gently. "Yes, that's me," he said, straightening slightly. "Chester Lowell. I have an appointment, very important, can't be late." I looked at the confused man before me and saw not a stranger, but a reflection of what I might become, what Heather and Kyle perhaps already saw when they looked at me. Something broke inside me then, but something else, something stronger, took its place. "Mr. Lowell, I think I can help you get home," I said, offering my arm. "Would you like to walk with me for a bit?" He took my arm with the trusting innocence of a child. "That would be lovely. You're very kind." As we walked slowly along the park path, with the stars beginning to emerge above us, I couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought us together on this particular evening, two old men adrift in a world that was moving on without them. Little did I know that helping Chester Lowell find his way home would lead me to find my own path forward, and change everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the power hidden in the most unexpected connections. The walk with Chester was slow but purposeful. His address was on the ID card in his wallet, just a few blocks from the park, in one of those newer assisted living communities that had sprung up in recent years. As we walked, he drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes offering crystal-clear memories from decades past, then asking me the same questions he'd posed minutes earlier. "Did you know I was an engineer?" he said proudly, his back straightening momentarily. "Bridges mostly, built things to last." "That must have been rewarding work," I replied, guiding him gently around. A crack in the sidewalk. "Oh yes, nothing like seeing something you've created standing strong against time." His eyes clouded briefly. "Though nothing stands forever, does it?" I thought of my land, of the home I'd maintained for decades, of the future my children were so eager to dismantle. "No, I suppose not. I had a daughter," Chester continued, his voice suddenly distant. "Caroline, beautiful girl, smart as a whip." His face darkened. "She doesn't visit anymore, too busy, she says." I felt a pang of recognition. I have 2 children myself. "Do they visit you?" The simple question cut straight to my heart. "Not as often as they once did." Chester nodded knowingly. "They forget, you see. Forget that we were young once too, that we had dreams and strength and purpose." He tapped his temple. "Even when this starts to go, those things remain." We arrived at Evergreen Gardens, a tasteful complex of condos designed for independent seniors. The night manager recognized Chester immediately, relief washing over her face. "Mr. Lowell, we've been so worried. Your granddaughter has been calling everywhere looking for you." "Granddaughter?" Chester looked genuinely confused. "Yes, Samantha. She's on her way now." As if summoned by her name, a young woman hurried through the entrance, her face tight with worry. She couldn't have been more than 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that looked much older than her years. "Grandpa!" She embraced Chester, who looked momentarily bewildered before his face softened in recognition. "Sam," he said simply, patting her back. She pulled away to examine him, checking for injuries with practiced movements. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, fine," he insisted. "This gentleman helped me find my way." Samantha turned to me, noticing me for the first time. Gratitude and exhaustion mingled in her expression. "Thank you so much for bringing him home. He's been wandering more lately." "It was no trouble," I said. "We had a nice walk." I'd like to repay you somehow. Please let me. I held up my hand. Truly, it's not necessary. At least let me know your name and where I can reach you. I'd like to properly thank you. Walter Granger, I replied. I live on Oak Ridge Road, the old farmhouse with the red barn. Recognition flickered in her eyes. The property with the apple orchard? Out past the old mill. I nodded, surprised. You know it? Yes. Something crossed her face. Hesitation, perhaps. Look, I really want to thank you properly. Would it be okay if I stopped by tomorrow? I'll bring something homemade. Before I could protest again, Chester spoke up. You should accept, Walter. My Samantha makes the best apple pie in Idaho. The mention of apple pie brought a sad smile to my face. Margaret had been known for her apple pies, made from fruit grown in our own orchard. I hadn't tasted one since she passed. All right then, I conceded. But just your company will be thanks enough. As I turned to leave, Chester caught my sleeve. His eyes were suddenly clear, focused with an intensity that hadn't been there before. You know, he said quietly, sometimes the people who truly see us aren't the ones we're born to, but the ones who find us when we're lost. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this moment of lucidity. Thank you for seeing me, Walter, he finished, giving my arm a gentle squeeze. The walk home was longer than I remembered, or perhaps it was just the weight of the day pressing down on my shoulders. The moon hung low and full over my property as I approached, casting long shadows across the fields my father had once ploughed by hand. In that silver light, the land looked almost ethereal, not a commodity to be divided and sold, but something alive and breathing, with its own history and memory. I climbed the porch steps slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it. The lemonade glasses still on the table, the brochures for retirement communities scattered where Heather had accidentally left them. I gathered them up and tossed them in the trash. Then I noticed something peeking out from beneath the fruit bowl, the corner of the map Kyle had been so quick to hide. I pulled it out and spread it across the table. There it was, my life's work, reduced to parcels and lot numbers. Notes in Kyle's handwriting marked potential values, while Heather's neat script had added names of developers and potential buyers. In the margin, a rough calculation of expected proceeds, split evenly between them, with a small portion set aside for my care. My hands shook as I folded the map and placed it in my desk drawer. Not from rage, though that simmered beneath the surface, but from a profound sadness. When had I become a burden to them? When had their love been replaced by calculation? I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, Margaret's favorite, which I kept for special occasions, and stepped back onto the porch. The night was still except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. I raised my glass to the stars. I miss you, Maggie. I whispered. You'd know what to do, you always did. The silence that answered was familiar now, if no less painful. I sipped the whiskey, letting it warm me from the inside, and thought about Chester Lowell, a man who built bridges, now lost in the labyrinth of his own mind. And yet, in his confusion, he'd offered me clarity, a moment of connection that my own flesh and blood had failed to provide. As I finished my drink, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Heather and Kyle, not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what they were planning. Knowledge was power, my father used to say, and right now, I needed all the power I could get. With that resolution, I went inside to prepare for Samantha's visit tomorrow. Something told me it would be more significant than a simple thank you. I couldn't have known then just how right I was. The next morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I woke before dawn, a habit from my teaching days that Margaret used to tease me about. The birds aren't even up yet, Walter, she'd mumble, pulling the blankets over her head. I made coffee and carried it out to the porch, watching as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled across my land. In that gentle morning light, with dew glistening on the grass, I could almost believe nothing had changed, that Margaret was still inside making breakfast, that Heather and Kyle were still the children who had once run laughing through these fields. But everything had changed, and I needed to be ready. I spent the morning tidying the house, not for Samantha's benefit, but for my own, physical. A work had always helped me think, and God knows I had thinking to do. By noon, the kitchen was spotless, the living room dusted, and I'd even pulled some of Margaret's homemade preserves from the cellar, apple butter she'd made from our own fruit the year before she got sick. The knock came precisely at 1 o'clock. When I opened the door, Samantha Lowell stood there holding not a pie as promised, but a large manila envelope. "Mr. Granger," she said, her expression serious, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I replied, stepping back to let her in. "And please, call me Walter." She hesitated at the threshold, as if weighing a decision. "Before I come in, I need to be honest with you. I didn't just come to thank you for helping my grandfather." Something in her tone made me straighten. "Oh? I came because I need to show you something." She tapped the envelope. "Something I think you should see." I led her to the kitchen table, where sunlight streamed through windows Margaret had insisted on keeping spotlessly clean. "Would you like some coffee, tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." As I busied myself with the pot, Samantha glanced around the kitchen, her eyes lingering on the old photographs lining the walls. Margaret and me on our wedding day, Heather's high school graduation, Kyle's first baseball game. "You have a beautiful home," she said. "How long have you lived here?" 43 years, I replied, setting a mug before her. "It was my father's before that and his father's before him. My grandfather built this house with his own hands in 1932. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "So the land has been in your family for generations." 4 generations. My great-grandfather purchased it back in 1891. I sat across from her, curiosity growing. "But I suspect you already knew that." Samantha took a sip of her coffee, then carefully opened the manila envelope. "Mr. Granger, Walter, I work at the county records office part-time while I finish my master's in library science. I mostly digitize old property records and land surveys." She slid a document across the table, a photocopy of what appeared to be a grant deed from the 1970s. 3 weeks ago, I came across this while archiving records from before the digital era. It caught my attention because of some unusual language in the transfer clause. I picked up the document, adjusting my reading glasses. It was a transfer of land between my father, James Granger, and my grandfather, Samuel Granger. My eyes skimmed the legal jargon until Samantha pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "This clause here," she said, "is what lawyers call a life estate with powers. It essentially means that while you, as the grantee, have full use and ownership of the property during your lifetime, the land cannot be sold by any descendant until after your death, or unless you voluntarily sign over your rights in writing." I read the paragraph again, my heart beginning to pound. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that legally your children cannot sell this land without your explicit written consent, not a single acre, and any attempt to do so would be invalid. Under Idaho state law." I set the paper down, my hands trembling slightly. "How did you know about my children, about their plans?" Samantha's expression softened. "I didn't. Not specifically. But yesterday, when you mentioned your name and address, I remembered this document, and when I brought my grandfather home last night, he kept talking about the kind man whose children want to take his land. Even in his confusion, he understood what was happening." She hesitated, then added, "And there's something else you should know. 2 days ago, a woman named Heather Granger came to the records office requesting information about your property's survey boundaries and ownership history. My daughter's name hit me like a physical blow." "Heather was at your office?" Samantha nodded. "She was. With a man. I assume your son. They were discussing potential subdivision of the property with a developer who was waiting in the lobby. They mentioned something about early-stage documentation and getting things moving before winter." The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. "They're already talking to developers behind my back?" "I'm afraid so." She pulled another document from the envelope, a preliminary subdivision application with my property address clearly visible at the top. "This hasn't been officially filed yet, but it was drafted by Westridge Development. Your daughter's business card was stapled to it. Heather Granger, Red Valley Realty." I stared at the form, reality crashing down around me. My own children weren't just planning to sell my land someday. They were actively working to make it happen now while I was still very much alive. "There's one more thing," Samantha said quietly, pulling out a final document. "This is a power of attorney form, prepared but not yet notarized. It would grant your daughter legal authority to make property decisions on your behalf." My vision blurred. I'd seen a similar form on Heather's clipboard last month, but she'd explained it away as standard paperwork for a financial advisor she wanted me to meet. I hadn't signed it, thank God, but the fact that it existed at all "Why are you showing me all this?" I asked finally, my voice hoarse. "Why get involved in a stranger's family problems?" Samantha was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "When I was 19, my mother tried to have my grandfather declared incompetent so she could sell his house, the house where I grew up after my parents divorced. She almost succeeded. If not for a neighbor who spoke up at the hearing." She shook her head. "I've seen what happens when family reduces people to assets. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." I looked at this young woman, this stranger who had gone out of her way to warn me, to arm me with information my own flesh and blood had tried to hide. Something Chester had said the night before echoed in my mind. Sometimes the people who truly see us aren't the ones we're born to, but the ones who find us when we're lost. "Thank you," I said simply. "I don't know what else to say, except thank you." "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself." "What would you suggest I do?" Samantha leaned forward. "First, secure these documents somewhere safe, not in this house. Second, consult an elder law attorney immediately. I can recommend someone who helped my grandfather." She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "Victoria Chen. She specializes in cases like yours. Tell her I sent you." I pocketed the card, my mind already racing with next steps. What about Heather and Kyle? Should I confront them? "Not yet," Samantha cautioned. "Not until you've spoken with Victoria and secured your legal position. Information is power, Walter. Right now, they don't know that you know." She glanced at her watch. "I should get going. My grandfather will be wondering where I am." She gathered her things, leaving the copies of the documents with me. At the door she paused. "My grandfather says you built bridges." I smiled, confused. "No, that was Chester." She nodded. "Yes, Chester built physical bridges, but he says you're building something else. Bridges between people who've lost their way. He may be confused about many things, but sometimes—" She shrugged. "Sometimes I think he sees things the rest of us." "Amiss?" After Samantha left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the documents she'd brought, tangible evidence of my children's betrayal. Part of me wanted to call them immediately, to demand explanations, to let loose the hurt and anger burning in my chest. But another part, a calmer, wiser part, knew that Samantha was right. This wasn't the time for emotional confrontation. This was the time for strategy. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on Victoria Chen's card. "Ms. Chen," I said when she answered. "My name is Walter Granger. Samantha Lowell suggested I call you. I believe I'm going to need your help." The next morning, I met Victoria Chen at her downtown office. Unlike the glossy high-rises that housed most of Boise's legal firms, Victoria worked from a converted Victorian house with wraparound porches and stained glass windows. Her assistant, a young man with kind eyes, led me to a consultation room that felt more like a living room than a lawyer's office. Victoria herself was a surprise, probably in her late 50s, with a streak of silver in her black hair and rectangular glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a direct gaze that immediately put me at ease. "Samantha filled me in on the basics," she said, settling into an armchair across from me. "But I'd like to hear everything from you, Mr. Granger." "Walter, please," I said, and then I told her everything, from overhearing my children's conversation to meeting Chester, from Samantha's revelations to the power of attorney form I'd nearly signed. As I spoke, Victoria took notes in a leather-bound journal, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set her pen down and leaned forward. "First, let me be clear. What your children are attempting is not just unethical, it's potentially illegal. Attempting to sell property without proper authority, misrepresenting ownership rights, and preparing power of attorney documentation under false pretenses are all serious matters." She adjusted her glasses. "The good news is that the grant deed Samantha found gives us solid legal ground. Your father was very smart to include that clause." "I didn't even know it existed," I admitted. "Dad never mentioned it." "Many people of that generation built in protections without necessarily discussing them," Victoria said. "They'd seen enough family land lost during the Depression to be cautious." She opened a folder on the coffee table between us. "Based on what you've told me, I recommend we take several immediate actions. First, we need to secure your property rights with updated documentation. Second, we should place a legal hold on any potential transactions involving your property. Third, we need to establish clear boundaries with your children. I winced at the last part. Despite everything, the thought of confronting Heather and Kyle directly made my stomach churn. They were still my children, after all. The ones I'd taught to ride bikes and helped with homework. The ones I'd stayed up with during nightmares and driven to college. Victoria seemed to read my thoughts. I understand. This is difficult, Walter. Many of my clients struggle with the same conflict, protecting themselves while preserving family relationships. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is establish clear boundaries. She was right, of course. I nodded slowly. What exactly do you suggest? A formal family meeting here in my office. Professional, calm, and documented. We'll lay out the legal reality of the situation and give them an opportunity to explain their actions. And if they refuse to come? Victoria's smile was slight but determined. In my experience, when people receive an official letter from an attorney, they tend to take it seriously, especially when it mentions potential legal consequences. We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. Victoria would draft a letter to Heather and Kyle, requesting their presence at a family meeting the following week. In the meantime, she would file paperwork to secure my property rights and place a hold on any potential transactions. There's one more thing, I said as our meeting was wrapping up. Samantha mentioned that Heather and Kyle were already talking to developers. Is there any way to find out exactly what they've been planning? Victoria tapped her pen against her notebook. As a matter of fact, there is. I have a contact at the county planning department who might be willing to check if any preliminary discussions have been registered. It's not unusual for developers to have exploratory conversations before formal applications are submitted. Would that be legal? To ask, I mean. Perfectly legal. Property. Records and planning discussions are generally public information. I'll make some inquiries and let you know what I find out. As I stood to leave, Victoria placed a hand on my arm. One last thing, Walter. I want you to prepare yourself for what might come out of this. Family disputes over property can bring up deep-seated issues. Things may get worse before they get better. I nodded, a heaviness settling in my chest. I understand. But remember, she added, her voice softening, you're doing the right thing. Not just for yourself, but for the land your family has stewarded for generations. On the drive home, I took a different route than usual, one that wound through the older neighborhoods of Boise. These streets were lined with houses that had stood for a century or more, witnesses to the city's transformation from frontier town to modern capital. I wondered how many of them had seen family disputes like mine, how many had changed hands due to betrayal or necessity. As I turned onto my own road, the autumn sun cast long shadows across my fields. The apple trees in the orchard were heavy with fruit, the same variety Margaret and I had planted in our first year of marriage. Next week would be harvest time, and for the first time in 40 years I would be picking them alone, or would I? An idea began to form in my mind, something unexpected and perhaps a little bold. I pulled into my driveway and immediately reached for my phone, searching for a number I'd stored just yesterday. Samantha? It's Walter Granger. I was wondering if you and Chester might be free this weekend. There's something I could use some help with. When Saturday arrived, I was up with the dawn again, pulling crates and ladders from the barn. By the time Samantha's car pulled up the gravel driveway, I had everything set up near the orchard, picking baskets, my old cider press, and a folding table for sorting. Chester emerged from the passenger side, more put together than he'd been, in the park. His shirt was neatly buttoned, his hair combed, though his eyes still held that slight uncertainty I recognized. Samantha followed, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair tied back with a bandana. "Walter!" Chester called out, his face lighting up with recognition. "The bridge man." I smiled, not bothering to correct him. "Good morning, Chester. Thank you both for coming." Samantha approached, eyeing the equipment I'd laid out. "Apple harvest?" I nodded. "Margaret and I used to do this together every year. After she passed, well, I couldn't bring myself to do it alone." I gestured to the trees, heavy with red and gold fruit. "Seems a shame to let them go to waste, though." "What will you do with them all?" she asked. "Some we'll keep for eating. The rest will become cider, applesauce, and preserves." I hesitated. "At least that's the plan, if you're willing to help." Chester was already wandering toward the trees, reaching up to touch a low-hanging apple. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Just beautiful." Samantha smiled. "We'd be happy to help. Just tell us what to do." And so we spent the day harvesting apples. Chester working from the ground, Samantha and I on ladders reaching for the highest branches. Despite his confusion, Chester was meticulous, examining each apple carefully before placing it in his basket. Occasionally he'd stop and tell stories from his engineering days, some clear and detailed, others fragmented and jumbled. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the work, the rhythm of it, the simple pleasure of hands doing what they were meant to do. By mid-afternoon we had filled a dozen crates with apples. I brought out sandwiches and Margaret's apple cider from last year's batch, and we sat in the shade of the oldest tree, resting our tired muscles. "Your wife made this?" Samantha asked, sipping the cider. I nodded. "Margaret could make anything grow, anything taste good. She had a gift. You must miss her terribly." "Every day," I admitted. "But days like this, it's almost like she's still here. In the trees she planted, the recipes she perfected." Chester, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. "The bridges remain," he said clearly, "even when the engineer is gone." Samantha and I exchanged a glance, surprised by the lucidity of his observation. "Yes," I said softly, "the bridges remain." As the sun began to set, we loaded the last of the apple crates into my truck. I would drive them to a local food pantry tomorrow, another tradition Margaret had started. "Thank you," I said, as Samantha and Chester prepared to leave. "This meant more to me than I can say." "It was our pleasure," Samantha replied. "Grandpa hasn't been this engaged in weeks." Chester, who was already settled in the passenger seat, rolled down his window. "You know what they say about apples and doctors," he called out with a wink. I laughed. "Indeed I do, Chester." As their car disappeared down the driveway, I turned back to look at my land in the fading light. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something like peace settling over me. Yes, difficult days lay ahead. The meeting with Heather and Kyle loomed large in my mind, but today had reminded me of something essential, that life goes on, that new connections can form in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes helping others is the best way to help yourself. Inside the house, I noticed the answering machine blinking. 3 messages, all from Victoria Chen. "Walter, I've made some inquiries about those developers. Call me as soon as you can. There's something you need to know." I called Victoria back immediately, and her voice carried a mix of concern and determination that made my heart race. "Walter, I've uncovered something you need to know before the meeting. Westridge Development isn't just any company. It's a subsidiary of Capital View Properties, one of the largest commercial developers in the Northwest." "What does that mean for me?" I asked, pacing my kitchen floor. "It means there's big money involved. My contact at the planning department confirmed they've been discussing a mixed-use residential and retail space for your area. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar project." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "And my children are involved in this?" Victoria's pause told me everything. "According to my source, Heather has been named as the listing agent for the entire development. The commission alone would be substantial, and there's a promissory agreement with Kyle's signature that mentions a consulting fee of $250,000. I had to sit down, the weight of this revelation crushing me. My own children weren't just trying to move me out of my home, they stood to profit enormously from it. "There's one more thing," Victoria added carefully. "The meeting we scheduled for next week, Heather called my office this morning trying to cancel it. When my assistant wouldn't accommodate her, she mentioned they were planning to visit you this weekend to sort things out privately." A chill ran down my spine. "They're coming here? Tomorrow?" "I believe so. Walter, do not sign anything they put in front of you. Not a single document, no matter what they say." "I won't," I promised, my resolve hardening. "What should I do when they arrive?" "Listen, observe, but reveal nothing about what we know or our plans. The formal meeting in my office will still proceed as scheduled. That's when we'll lay everything out legally." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching darkness fall over my land. The property that had nurtured 4 generations of my family, that held Margaret's garden and my children's footprints, that carried memories in every acre, reduced to dollar signs and development plans. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept seeing the map they'd drawn, hearing their voices discussing my land as if I were already gone. By morning, I was exhausted but clear-headed. I knew what needed to be done. They arrived just after lunch, both of them together, something that rarely happened anymore. Heather in her polished business attire, Kyle in what he probably considered casual weekend clothes, but which still looked freshly purchased. I greeted them on the porch, offering coffee that they both declined. "Dad," Heather began once we were seated in the living room, "we need to talk about some options for your future." I noticed she'd placed her briefcase prominently on the coffee table. "Ready for business." "What kind of options?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Kyle leaned forward, hands clasped together. "We've been thinking about your situation here. This place is just too much for one person to manage." "I managed fine yesterday," I said, mildly. "Harvested all the apples with some help from new friends." This seemed to throw them momentarily. Heather recovered first. "That's wonderful, Dad, but it's not just about the physical work. It's about your future security. We've found a really nice retirement community," Kyle added, pulling a glossy brochure from his jacket pocket. "Willow Creek Estates. They have beautiful apartments, social activities, medical staff on site." I took the brochure, noting the perfectly manicured gardens and smiling seniors playing chess. Nothing like my weathered barn and apple trees. "Looks expensive," I commented. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss," Heather said, opening her briefcase. "We've had some interest in the property. Significant interest, actually. The proceeds from the sale would more than cover your expenses at Willow Creek for the rest of your life, with plenty left over." She slid a document across the table toward me. "This is just a preliminary agreement. It would allow us to move forward with discussions while you consider your options." I picked up the paper, scanning it while remembering Victoria's warning. The language was deliberately vague, authorizing Heather and Kyle to explore opportunities and act as representatives regarding the property. "What exactly would I be signing here?" I asked. "It's just authorization for us to have conversations on your behalf," Kyle said quickly. "No commitments, just exploring options." I set the paper down and looked at my children, really looked at them. Heather, her eyes sharp and calculating, so like her. Mother in appearance, but nothing like her in spirit. Kyle, fidgeting slightly, unable to hold my gaze for more than a few seconds. "Tell me about Westridge Development," I said quietly. The change in the room was immediate. Kyle's head snapped up, and Heather's professional smile froze in place. "How do you—" Kyle began before Heather cut him off with a look. "We've spoken with several potential buyers," she said smoothly. "Westridge is just one of them. And your commission as the listing agent, is that just one aspect as well?" The color drained from Heather's face. "Dad, this isn't about me. This is about what's best for you." "Is that why you tried to cancel the meeting with Victoria Chen?" I asked, watching confusion and then alarm spread across their features. "Or why you've been preparing power of attorney documents without my knowledge?" Kyle stood up abruptly. "Who have you been talking to? Does it matter?" I kept my voice calm, though my heart was pounding. "What matters is that you've been planning to sell my home, my life, out from under me." "That's not true," Heather protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're trying to help you. By forging documentation. By meeting with developers behind my back. By treating me like I'm already dead." The hurt I'd been suppressing broke through, making my voice crack. "I'm your father. I taught you both to ride bikes on that driveway. I helped you with homework at that kitchen table. How could you do this?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree Margaret had planted when Heather was born. "You don't understand," Kyle finally said, his voice defensive. "We're thinking long-term. This property is valuable, but only if we act now, while the market is right." "While I'm still alive to sign it away, you mean?" I said. Heather's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Dad, be reasonable. You can't maintain this place forever. Sooner or later, decisions will have to be made." "You're right," I agreed, standing up. "And I've made mine. I'm not selling, not 1 acre." "You can't be serious," Kyle exclaimed. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "For whom?" I asked quietly. "For me, or for you and your $250,000 consulting fee?" Kyle's face reddened. "You've been spying on us?" "No, Kyle. I've been protecting myself. Something I never thought I'd need to do against my own children." Heather's eyes narrowed. "This is Margaret talking. She always was sentimental about this place." The mention of my late wife's name, used as a weapon, sparked something in me. Not anger, but a profound sadness mixed with resolve. "Your mother loved this land because she understood what it represented. Not just property, but heritage, roots, Something neither of you seem to value anymore. I picked up the document they'd brought and deliberately tore it in half. I think you should leave now. We'll continue this discussion next week in Victoria's office with all the legal facts on the table. Legal facts? Heather's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. What exactly do you think you know, Dad? I know about the, grant deed, I said simply. I know that legally you cannot sell this property without my written consent. Not a single acre of it. And I know that what you've been attempting borders on elder abuse under Idaho state law. Their stunned expressions would have been satisfying if the whole situation weren't so heartbreaking. This isn't over, Heather said as they gathered their things. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made, I replied, walking them to the door, was forgetting that family isn't just about blood. It's about trust. After they left, the house felt both emptier and somehow lighter, as if a long, festering wound had finally been lanced. I called Victoria to update her on what had happened, then poured myself a small glass of whiskey and returned to the porch. The sun was setting over my land, painting the fields in gold and amber. Soon it would be dark, but for now there was light. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The formal meeting still loomed ahead, and I had no illusions that Heather and Kyle would simply accept defeat. But for the first time since overhearing their conversation in my kitchen, I felt confident in my path forward. My phone rang, breaking the evening silence. It was Samantha. "Walter, is everything okay? I've been thinking about you all day." I smiled into the receiver. "Everything's fine. In fact, I was wondering if you and Chester might be free for dinner tomorrow night. There's something I'd like to discuss with you both." "We'd love to," she replied. "What should we bring?" "Just yourselves," I said, watching the last rays of sunlight touch the tops of the apple trees, and perhaps a bit of hope for the future. Sunday evening arrived with a gentle rain, the kind that Margaret always said made the apples sweeter. I spent the day cooking, her venison stew recipe, fresh bread, and an apple pie using fruit we'd harvested yesterday. The kitchen filled with familiar scents, and I found myself talking to her as I worked, a habit I'd never quite broken. "You'd like Samantha, Maggie," I said, crimping the edges of the pie crust the way she'd taught me. "She's straightforward, like you were. And Chester, well, he's a bit lost, but aren't we all in some ways?" By the time Samantha's car pulled into the driveway, the house felt warmer than it had in years, not just from the oven, but from something deeper, a sense of purpose perhaps, or the simple pleasure of preparing a meal for others. Chester entered first, raindrops glistening in his white hair. "Something smells delicious," he announced, his eyes clearer than they'd been during our apple picking. "Reminds me of Sunday dinners when I was a boy." Samantha followed, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "These are from Grandpa's garden at Evergreen," she explained. "He insisted on bringing them." "A gift should never be empty-handed," Chester declared, with such conviction that both Samantha and I smiled. "Thank you," I said, taking the flowers and arranging them in Margaret's favorite blue vase. "They're perfect." Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. Chester was having one of his good days, telling coherent stories about bridges he'd designed throughout the Northwest. Samantha shared anecdotes from the county archives, fascinating snippets of Boise history she'd uncovered while digitizing old records. I told them about Heather and Kyle's visit, about the confrontation and what might lie ahead at the formal meeting. They won't give up easily, Samantha warned, accepting a second helping of stew. "Not with that kind of money involved." "I know," I sighed. "Victoria thinks they might try to claim I'm not competent to manage my affairs. It's a common tactic in cases like mine." Chester, who had been quietly eating his pie, looked up sharply. "Competence," he said with surprising clarity, "is not about remembering where you put your keys. It's about knowing what matters." Samantha reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's very wise, Grandpa." As we moved to the living room for coffee, I felt a nervous energy building inside me. The idea that had been forming since yesterday finally needed to be voiced. "I have a proposition for you both," I said, setting my cup down carefully. "Something I've been considering." They waited. Chester with patient curiosity, Samantha with a slight tilt of her head that reminded me of Margaret. "This land, all 15 acres, has been in my family for 4 generations. I've always assumed it would pass to Heather and Kyle someday, but now," I shook my head, "now I know they'd sell it before my body was cold." "That's their loss," Samantha said gently. "Yes, but it's also mine. And potentially the lands. I leaned forward. I want to create a living trust for the property, one that would preserve it as agricultural land in perpetuity, with provisions for sustainable management. Samantha's eyes widened slightly. That's a wonderful idea, Walter. There's more, I continued. I'd like to offer you both a place in this vision. Chester, with your engineering background, and Samantha, with your understanding of historical preservation. You could help ensure this land remains what it was always meant to be. Not a shopping center or luxury condos, but a place where things grow. You're offering us a job? Samantha asked, clearly surprised. I'm offering a partnership, a future. I gestured toward the window where rain was still falling softly on fields that had sustained my family for generations. There's a small cottage on the eastern edge of the property, originally the caretaker's house. It's been empty for years, but with some work, it could be a home again. For both of you, if you wanted. Chester, who had been unusually attentive throughout my explanation, suddenly stood and walked to the window. For a moment, I feared I'd confused or upset him. But when he turned back, his eyes were clear and focused. Bridges, he said firmly. That's what we'd be building, not just preserving the past, but connecting it to the future. Samantha looked at her grandfather with a mixture of surprise and pride. Grandpa, that's exactly right. She turned back to me. Walter, this is incredibly generous, but are you sure? You've only known us a few days. Sometimes a few days is all it takes to recognize what matters, I replied, echoing Chester's earlier wisdom. Besides, it wouldn't happen overnight. Victoria can help us structure everything legally, with appropriate safeguards, but I wanted to share the idea with you now to see if it's something you might consider. Samantha was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between Chester and me. I'd need to think about it. Discuss it with Grandpa when he's... She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Of course, I said. There's no rush. The meeting with Heather and Kyle is our first priority. Speaking of which, Samantha said, straightening her shoulders, I'd like to attend that meeting with you if you're comfortable with it, as a witness from the county records office. Her offer caught me off guard. You'd do that? Absolutely. Your children need to understand that other people are watching, that you're not alone in this. Chester, who had returned to his seat, patted my hand. Never face bullies alone. First rule of the schoolyard. The simple wisdom in his statement made me chuckle despite the seriousness of the situation. Thank you, both of you. Having you. There would mean a great deal to me. As they prepared to leave later that evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and clean. Stars were beginning to appear in breaks between the clouds, and the air smelled of wet earth and apple blossoms. Think about my offer, I said as I walked them to their car. No pressure, but know that it's sincere. Samantha hugged me, a quick, surprising gesture that reminded me how long it had been since I'd experienced such simple human contact. We will. And whatever happens, Walter, you're not alone anymore. On Wednesday morning, Victoria's office was bathed in autumn sunlight. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the antique desk, where Victoria sat reviewing our strategy one final time. Samantha sat beside me, professional, in a navy blazer with the county records office ID clipped to her lapel. Remember, Victoria said, adjusting her glasses, stay calm no matter what accusations they make. The documentation speaks for itself. The door opened, and Victoria's assistant ushered in Heather and Kyle. Their expressions changed from professional neutrality to surprise and then suspicion when they spotted Samantha. What is she doing here? Heather demanded, remaining standing as Kyle reluctantly took a seat. Ms. Lowell is here in her capacity as a county records administrator, Victoria explained smoothly. She's the one who identified the key documentation we'll be discussing today. Kyle shot a venomous look my way. So this is who you've been conspiring with, Dad? Before I could respond, Victoria raised her hand. Mr. Granger, this meeting is not about casting aspersions. It's about establishing legal facts regarding your father's property. She turned to my children. Facts that you both appear to have deliberately obscured. For the next 30 minutes, Victoria methodically laid out everything. The grant deed with its protective clause, the preliminary development plans, the unauthorized, discussions with Westridge Development, and the attempt to secure power of attorney under false pretenses. As the evidence mounted, Heather's professional facade began to crack. Kyle simply stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. This is absurd, Heather finally burst out. We were trying to help Dad plan for his future. By securing personal financial gain? Victoria asked, her voice measured but pointed. The documentation suggests otherwise, Ms. Granger. You don't understand, Kyle interjected. Dad's all alone out there. He can't manage that land forever. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I'm not alone, I said quietly but firmly. And I'm not incapable. What I am is disappointed. The simple statement landed like a physical blow. For the first time, both my children seemed to register the depth of their betrayal. Dad, Heather began, her voice softer than before, we didn't mean— Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant exactly what you did. You saw an opportunity and you took it, regardless of what it would cost me. I leaned forward, looking each of them in the eye. But here's what will happen now. The land stays mine, to do with as I choose. I will be creating a trust to preserve it as agricultural land in perpetuity. Neither of you will have authority to sell it. Not now, not after I'm gone. Victoria slid 2 documents across the table. These are formal cease and desist notices. Any further attempts to market or develop Mr. Granger's property will result in legal action. Heather's face hardened. So that's it. You're cutting us out. Completely. Over a misunderstanding. This was no misunderstanding. Samantha spoke up, her voice professional but firm. The records show deliberate misrepresentation. In some jurisdictions, what you attempted could be classified as elder abuse. Kyle paled visibly. We would never— But you did, I said, feeling strangely calm. The question now is what happens next. Not with the land. That's decided. But with us. As my words hung in the air, I realized that despite everything, I still loved my children. They had lost their way, seduced by money and convenience, but they were still the babies I had held, the toddlers whose tears I had dried, the teenagers I had guided through heartbreaks and triumphs. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I continued, my voice softening slightly. That door remains open, but trust once broken must be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, if you're willing to try. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kyle looked up, his expression reminding me suddenly of the little boy who had broken our neighbor's window with a baseball and been too scared to confess. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I really am. Heather remained silent, but something in her rigid posture had softened almost imperceptibly. Victoria gathered her papers. I think we've covered everything necessary for today. Mr. Granger, is there anything else you'd like to add? I looked at my children, truly looked at them, and saw not just their betrayal but their brokenness. Their mother's death had changed them too, in ways I perhaps hadn't fully recognized. Just this, I said. Your mother loved you both beyond measure. She would be disappointed by your actions, but she would never stop hoping you'd find your way back to what matters. As we all stood to leave, I felt lighter somehow, as if naming the betrayal had begun to rob it of its power. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now it was clear. Outside in the gentle autumn, sunshine, Samantha squeezed my arm. You did well in there. We did well, I corrected her. I couldn't have faced them without knowing you and Victoria had my back. She smiled. That's what bridges are for, right? To help us cross difficult terrain. I nodded, thinking of Chester's wisdom and Margaret's love and the land that had sustained 4 generations of my family. Exactly. To help us cross and to connect us to what matters most. A month passed after the meeting with Heather and Kyle. The vibrant colors of autumn gave way to the first frosts of winter, painting my fields in crystalline white each morning. In that time, Victoria helped me establish the Granger Land Trust, with ironclad provisions to maintain the property as agricultural land in perpetuity. I named Samantha as co-trustee, ensuring that even after my time, someone who understood the land's value would help guide its future. The caretaker's cottage, neglected for years, began to show signs of life again. With Chester's surprising moments of engineering clarity and my own construction knowledge, we started the renovation, replacing rotted floorboards, updating the plumbing, restoring the stone fireplace that had warmed the original caretaker's family for decades. Samantha spent weekends clearing overgrown garden beds and researching period-appropriate fixtures for the 1930s structure. Neither Heather nor Kyle had reached out since the meeting. Their absence was a dull ache, but one that diminished a little each day as new connections filled the spaces they had left empty. You need to sand with "The grain not against it," Chester instructed one crisp Saturday morning as we worked on the cottage's original oak cabinets. His hands, though weathered and occasionally trembling, moved with confidence over the wood. "Been building things since I was a boy. My father taught me. His father taught him. Like the land," I commented, following his guidance. "Passed down through generations." Chester nodded, his eyes momentarily clear and focused. "That's how things last, Walter. We carry knowledge forward. We build things that outlive us." These moments of lucidity had been coming more frequently during our work on the cottage. The physical tasks, the smell of sawdust and varnish, they seemed to anchor him in ways that conversation alone couldn't. Samantha had noticed it too, commenting that he'd been sleeping better, wandering less. "The doctors say it won't last," she had confided one evening as we shared coffee on my porch, watching Chester contentedly sketch design improvements for the cottage's roof. "The disease will progress, but these good days, they're a gift. For all of us," I agreed. By mid-December, the cottage had transformed from a neglected shell into a cozy home. We'd preserved as much of the original character as possible: the hand-carved banister, the built-in bookshelves, the bay window that caught the morning light. Modern conveniences were added carefully, respecting the history while acknowledging the present. "It's beautiful," Samantha said as we stood in the completed living room, a fire crackling in the restored hearth. "I can't believe how much we've accomplished in such a short time." "It's amazing what's possible when people work together," I replied, thinking of all the solitary months after Margaret's passing, when I couldn't bring myself to repair even a loose shingle on my own roof. Chester wandered from room to room, running his hands over the walls we'd plastered, the windows we'd reglazed. "Good bones," he pronounced finally. "This house has good bones." That evening, after Chester had settled in one of the cottage's armchairs with an old engineering journal, Samantha and I walked back to the main house through a light snow. "Walter," she said hesitantly, "there's something I need to discuss with you." My heart sank, fearing she'd decided against my offer to live in the cottage. "Of course. Grandpa's doctor recommended a specialist consultation at the University Medical Center. They're doing research on his type of dementia, and they think he might qualify for a new treatment program." "That's wonderful news," I said, relieved. "It is, but—" she hesitated. "The program runs for 6 months with weekly appointments. It would be difficult to manage from here, commuting back and forth to the city." I understood her dilemma immediately. "You're worried about dividing your time between the cottage and taking care of Chester's medical needs." She nodded, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. "I want to accept your offer, to be part of this place, to help preserve it, but Grandpa has to come first." "Of course he does," I agreed, thinking quickly. "What if you postponed moving into the cottage until after the treatment program? The trust is established, the cottage isn't going anywhere. You wouldn't mind waiting?" "Samantha," I said gently, "you've given me something I never expected to find again. Purpose, connection, friendship. A few more months is nothing in the grand scheme of things." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you for understanding." We had nearly reached the main house when the sound of a car engine broke the evening quiet. Headlights swept across the snow-covered field as a vehicle turned onto my driveway. "Are you expecting someone?" Samantha asked. I shook my head, squinting against the glare. As the car came to a stop, I recognized it. Kyle's SUV, the one he'd bought last year when his consulting business had landed a major client. "It's my son," I said, a mixture of hope and apprehension rising in my chest. Samantha squeezed my arm. "Do you want me to give you privacy?" "No," I replied firmly. "Whatever this is, I'd appreciate having you here." Kyle emerged from the car alone, carrying a cardboard box. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, and there was a hesitancy in his steps that hadn't been there before. "Dad," he called out, stopping a few feet away. "I hope it's okay that I came by. I tried calling, but—" He gestured vaguely toward the house, where the answering machine likely held messages I hadn't checked. "It's fine," I said, not quite ready to make this easy for him. "What brings you here?" He shifted the box in his arms. I found some things of Mom's when I was cleaning out my storage. Unit. I thought you might want them." The mention of Margaret's belongings caught me off guard. After her death, Heather and Kyle had each taken a few mementos with my blessing. I hadn't realized there was more. "Thank you," I said, taking the box. "Would you like to come in? It's cold out here." Kyle glanced at Samantha, clearly wondering who she was and what she was doing at his father's house. In the evening. This is Samantha Lowell, I introduced her, a friend and the co-trustee of the land trust we discussed at Victoria's office. Understanding flashed across Kyle's face. Oh, yes, the trust. He nodded awkwardly to Samantha. Nice to meet you. Inside, I set the box on the kitchen table and put on the kettle for tea. Kyle stood uncomfortably by the door, taking in the changes to the house, the new curtains Samantha had helped me select, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the boots by the door that weren't mine. You've made some changes, he observed. Life doesn't stand still, I replied, arranging cups on a tray. Even for the elderly. He winced at that, catching the gentle rebuke. Dad, about what happened. Why don't we look at what you've brought? I suggested, not ready yet for whatever apology or explanation he might offer. The box contained photo albums I hadn't seen in years, a collection of Margaret's favorite books, and at the bottom, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, her wedding ring. I'd given it to Heather after the funeral, unable at the time to keep such a potent reminder of what I'd lost. Heather wanted me to bring this back to you, Kyle said quietly as I held the small gold band. She said it belongs here, with you. I closed my hand around the ring, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Thank you, I managed. Samantha quietly excused herself to check on Chester, giving us the privacy she'd offered earlier. Once she'd gone, Kyle sank into a kitchen chair, looking suddenly exhausted. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Dad, about what happened, about what I almost did to you. I sat across from him, still holding Margaret's ring. I'm listening. I lost my job, he admitted, staring at his hands. 3 weeks ago, the firm I was consulting for got acquired, and they eliminated my position. No severance, nothing. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Don't be. It was a wake-up call. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. I was so focused on money, on status, the house in the right neighborhood, the car that impressed clients. When Heather mentioned the potential sale of your land, he shook his head. I saw dollar signs, not your home, not our heritage. What about Heather? I asked. Is she having similar revelations? Kyle's expression tightened. We're not really speaking. After the meeting, she blamed me for everything falling apart. Said if I hadn't looked so guilty, we could have convinced you it was all a misunderstanding. That sounded like Heather, always calculating, always looking for an angle. And what do you think? Was it just a misunderstanding? No, Kyle said firmly. It was wrong. What we tried to do was wrong, and I'm sorry, Dad, truly sorry. The simple admission hung between us, more powerful than any elaborate explanation or excuse might have been. Outside, snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the world in clean white. I'm not asking for anything, Kyle continued after a moment. I know trust takes time to rebuild. I just wanted to return Mum's things and tell you face to face that I regret what happened. I studied my son, the boy who had once followed me everywhere, the teenager who couldn't wait to leave for college, the man who had nearly betrayed everything I held dear, and yet, still my son. Would you like to see what we've been working on? I asked, standing. The caretaker's cottage renovation, it's quite something. Surprise and cautious hope flickered across his face. I'd like that very much. As we walked through the snow toward the cottage, I told Kyle about the land trust, about meeting Chester and Samantha, about my vision for the property's future, not as an accusation or reminder of what he'd nearly destroyed, but as an invitation to understand what I was building now. You're not alone anymore, he observed as we approached the warmly lit cottage. I'm glad for that, Dad. Really? None of us should be alone, Kyle, I replied, thinking of Margaret, of Chester's moments of confusion, of Heather's calculating isolation. It's not how we're meant to live. That evening marked the beginning of a careful reconciliation. Not a return to blind trust, but the first tentative steps toward something new, a relationship based on honesty rather than obligation, on choice rather than blood alone. As Kyle prepared to leave, he hesitated by his car. Would it be okay if I came by next weekend? Maybe help with whatever you're working on next at the cottage? I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Chester's been talking about rebuilding the back porch. An extra pair of hands would be welcome. He nodded, a genuine smile breaking through for the first time that evening. I'll be here, and Dad, thank you for listening, for not shutting the door. As his taillights disappeared down the driveway, Samantha rejoined me on the porch. How are you feeling? She asked gently. I looked out over the snow-covered fields, at the land that had nearly torn my family apart, but was now perhaps beginning to bring us together again in unexpected ways. "I'm feeling like maybe bridges can be rebuilt, not just built," I said, "even when the damage seems irreparable." Samantha smiled, understanding the reference to Chester's wisdom. "Your son seems sincere." "I think he is," I agreed. "Heather will be a different challenge, but one step at a time." Inside the house, I placed Margaret's wedding ring on the mantel beside our wedding photo. "What do you think, Maggie?" I whispered. "Am I doing this right?" No answer came, of course, but as I turned away, the ring caught the firelight, sending a warm glow across the photograph of her smiling face. And somehow, that felt like enough. Spring arrived with a burst of green across my fields. The apple trees blossomed, their pink and white flowers promising another bountiful harvest. In the months since Kyle's first visit, much had changed. He had become a regular presence, spending weekends helping with projects around the property. The cottage's back porch had been rebuilt, stronger than before, with Chester directing operations from a comfortable chair, clipboard in hand. Heather remained distant, though Kyle reported she had been asking questions about my well-being. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. Chester had responded remarkably well to the university's treatment program. While the doctors cautioned that they were managing his condition, not curing it, his lucid periods had lengthened, and his confusion had become less frequent and less severe. "The structured activity has been crucial," his neurologist explained during a consultation I'd accompanied them to. "Regular physical work, problem-solving challenges, social engagement, these all help build cognitive resilience. Our bridge man is building his own bridges," I'd commented to Samantha afterward, making her smile. Today was a significant day, the official dedication of what we'd come to call Granger Heritage Orchard. Victoria had helped establish it as a working educational farm, partnering with the local agricultural extension office, to create programs for school children and community members. The spring sunshine warmed my back as I watched people arrive for the small ceremony. Kyle was already there, setting up folding chairs on the lawn beside the cottage. Chester supervised from the porch, occasionally calling out adjustments to the arrangement. Samantha appeared at my side wearing a blue dress that reminded me of the wildflowers that had begun to bloom along the edges of the fields. "Nervous?" she asked. "A little," I admitted. Public speaking was never my strong suit, even when I was teaching. "You'll do fine," she assured me. "Just speak from the heart." More cars arrived, bringing friends and neighbors I'd invited to the dedication. Victoria Chen came with her husband, elegant as always in a spring suit. Doug and Mary Wilson, our neighbors to the east, brought a basket of homemade preserves. Even some of my former students had made the effort to attend, now adults with children of their own. And then, just as we were about to begin, one more car turned into the driveway. A sleek silver sedan I recognized immediately. Heather. She emerged looking polished and professional as always, but there was a hesitancy in her step that I'd never associated with my confident, sometimes overbearing daughter. Kyle spotted her first, his surprise evident even from a distance. He approached her cautiously, and I watched them exchange a few words before both turned to look in my direction. I excused myself from Samantha and walked across the lawn to meet my daughter. "Heather," I said, stopping a few feet away, "this is unexpected." "Kyle told me about the dedication," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I hope it's okay that I came." "Of course it's okay," I said. "You're always welcome here. That never changed." Something flickered across her face. Relief, perhaps, or the release of a tension she'd been carrying. "The place looks good, Dad. Different, but good." "Change isn't always a bad thing," I observed, thinking of all that had transpired since that autumn day when I'd overheard my children planning to divide my land. "No, it isn't," she agreed. Then, with visible effort, she added, "I was wrong, Dad, about everything. I thought I knew what was best, but I was really just thinking about myself." The admission, coming from Heather, who never acknowledged mistakes, left me momentarily speechless. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What this place means to you. What family should mean." I studied my daughter. So like me in her stubbornness, so like her mother in her strength. "Thank you for coming today," I said simply. "It means more than you know." Kyle approached, cautiously. "Everything okay?" I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. "Yes, Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. As the three of us walked back toward the gathering, I noticed Samantha watching, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She gave me a subtle thumbs up before turning to help Chester from his chair. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Victoria spoke briefly about the legal establishment of the trust and its mission. A representative from the Agricultural Extension Office outlined the educational programs that would begin in the summer. Kyle surprised me by stepping forward to announce a grant he'd secured through his new employer, a sustainable agriculture nonprofit where he'd found work that, in his words, actually matters. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood before the small gathering. The land that had nurtured 4 generations of my family spread out behind me, and found that the words came easily after all. This land has witnessed births and deaths, triumphs and failures, beginnings and endings, I said, looking out at the faces before me, some familiar, some new, all connected, now by this place and this moment. But today we're ensuring that it will continue to witness life, to nurture growth, to connect people to the earth and to each other. My eyes found Chester, sitting tall and attentive in his chair, then moved to Samantha beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, to Kyle and Heather standing side by side for the first time in months, to the cottage we had restored together, its windows reflecting the spring sunshine. Someone very wise once told me that sometimes the people who truly see us aren't the ones we're born to, but the ones who find us when we're lost, I continued, watching Chester smile in recognition of his own words. I've been fortunate enough to experience both, to be seen by those connected to me by blood and by those connected to me by choice. As I spoke the final words of dedication, asking everyone to join me in a toast with glasses of fresh apple cider pressed from last year's harvest, I felt Margaret's presence more strongly than I had since her passing, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a continuation, in the land she had loved, in the children she had raised, in the community she had helped build. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and explored the property, Heather approached me where I stood by the old oak tree. "Mom would have loved this," she said quietly. "All these people celebrating the land." Yes, she would have, I agreed, touched that Heather had had the same thought. "I found a box of her recipes the other day," Heather continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "Her apple pie, her jam, all the things she used to make. I thought maybe I could try making some of them, for the educational programs, I mean, to show the children how to use what they grow." The offer, tentative as it was, represented a bridge I had feared might never be rebuilt. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. "Margaret always said recipes were meant to be shared, not hoarded." Heather smiled, a real smile, not the professional mask she so often wore. She did say that, didn't she? I'd forgotten. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself sitting on the cottage porch with Chester, watching as Samantha gave impromptu tours of the orchard, as Kyle helped children plant seedlings in the new community garden beds, as Heather engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion with Victoria, about something involving clipboard and gestures toward the old barn. "Quite a day," Chester commented, his voice clear and present. "Quite a transformation." "Which one?" I asked. "The land or the people?" He chuckled. "Both, I suppose. You can't really separate them, can you? The land shapes the people shape the land." I nodded, watching as Samantha concluded her tour and headed toward us, her face flushed with excitement. "Walter," she called as she approached, "the university group wants to know if they can include the orchard in their sustainable agriculture study. It would mean regular monitoring, documentation of growth patterns." "Say yes," Chester interrupted with a wink. "She's been talking about this for weeks." I laughed. "Of course it's a yes. This place is meant to be studied, to be learned from." Samantha beamed, then checked her watch. "We should head back to the main house. The catering should be arriving for the reception." As she helped Chester up from his chair, I realized how natural it had become to think of us as a unit, as a team working toward a common purpose. Not a replacement for the family I had built with Margaret, but an extension of it, a new branch grafted onto the sturdy trunk of what had come before. The reception at the main house brought everyone together in the space where, not so long ago, I had overheard my children plotting to divide my land. Now that same kitchen table held platters of food, the living room buzzed with conversation, and laughter echoed through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. I found a quiet moment to slip away to the porch, needing a breath of air and a moment of reflection. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the fields and bathing everything in golden light. The screen door opened behind me, and Heather stepped out, 2 glasses of cider in her hands. She offered one to me silently, and we stood side by side watching the sunset. "I've been thinking about selling my condo in the city," she said after a while. "It never really felt like home." I sipped my cider, waiting for her to continue. "Kyle mentioned there might be a position opening at his new organization, outreach coordinator for their land conservation projects." She glanced at me sideways. "It would mean moving back to this area." "I see," I said carefully, not wanting to push. "I don't expect to move back here to this house," she added quickly. "That's not what I'm suggesting. But being closer, getting to know Samantha and Chester better, being part of what you're building here. You'll always have a place here, Heather," I said gently, "in whatever capacity you choose." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "Thank you, Dad." Inside, the party continued. I could hear Chester's voice rising above the others, telling one of his engineering stories to a captivated audience. Kyle's laugh punctuated the tale at all the right moments. Samantha moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had what they needed, pausing occasionally to check on Chester, with the subtle vigilance of a devoted caretaker. "You've found quite a family," Heather observed, following my gaze through the window. "Not found," I corrected her. "Built. Just like the bridges Chester talks about. Deliberately, carefully, one connection at a time." As the golden light faded into the soft purple of twilight, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From betrayal to renewal, from isolation to connection, from loss to rediscovery. The land that had nearly been taken from me had instead become the foundation for something new and unexpected. Margaret would have understood. She always said that the best gardens contain both heirloom varieties and new hybrids, that the strength comes from the diversity, from the willingness to preserve what matters while embracing what grows. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet again, I stood once more on the porch, looking out at the land that had been in my family for 4 generations and would now continue to nurture and teach for generations to come, not as private property to be divided and sold, but as a living legacy to be shared and sustained. Chester's words came back to me, spoken during one of his moments of startling clarity. "Sometimes you must lose everything to remember who you really are. And sometimes the people who truly care aren't born into your life. They walk into it holding a stranger's hand." How right he had been. In helping a confused old man find his way home that autumn evening, I had found my own path forward. Not the one I had expected, but one filled with purpose, connection, and a deeper understanding of what family truly means. The night air carried the sweet scent of apple blossoms, promising fruit to come. Another season, another cycle, another beginning, and this time I wasn't facing it alone.